Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the first day of Novel Aquafeed Ingredients Webinar Week. Before we get started, just wanted to extend a huge thank you to Knip for sponsoring this webinar today. I'm Alex Sheretsky, Digital Media Coordinator for Annex Business Media, as well as your moderator for this session. Before I pass it over to your speaker this morning, I'd like to take a moment to go over a few housekeeping items. Firstly, this webinar is being recorded, so for any reason you have to leave early or you miss part of the presentation, a link to the recording will be emailed to all registrants shortly. Secondly, the audience is in listen-only mode, so cameras and microphones will be turned off for you. However, the chat and Q&A functions are open to you. Now I'd like to introduce your speaker for today, Guillaume Sauls with Knip. Guillaume is CSO of Knip and has been working with them for over 4 years. Originally from France, now based in Alabama, and headquartered right outside of Boston. He also has his PhD from Virginia Tech, and all of his experience in academia has been 100% on nutrition. Without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Guillaume for his presentation.
Well, thanks very much, Alex, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. I'm really thrilled to be here today and telling you a bit more about Knip and what we've been up to. So at Knip our mission is to save fish and shrimp lives, increasing farm yield, and contribute to a food secure future. And so today I will share with you an overview of recent technical results about our flagship product, Juve, which has been shown to drastically reduce stress-associated mortalities and other negative impacts. So why are we here? We all know the challenge of the human world population that is increasing and that needs to be fed, of course, later. And so we've all seen these numbers, but they're always striking. And especially when you think about the implication in terms of land and water use and other resources like this, where we must provide feed for an additional 56%, right, more feed that needs to be provided with the same resources, and hopefully we can use less while at the same time reducing our emissions. And so this is the challenge here. Of course, preaching in a choir here, as we all know, that fish farming is one of the most efficient and low impact way of producing protein for people. We've also all seen the official headlines now that aquaculture is producing more food than capture fisheries. So that's the elephant in the room. But there's another one that I'd like to share and point out. Is that the losses currently in aquaculture farm, it's not uncommon that the losses reach 20 to 30%, sometimes north of 50%, especially at the crop level. And that is oftentimes related to stress-related events, diseases, and as such. We've grown used and somewhat numb to these numbers. We are, of course, always trying to improve, but there's also this sense of this is aquaculture, this is normal, quote unquote. But I'd like to put this into perspective of terrestrial crop. And the FAO reports that the largest ever observed since they started to gather this data in 1961, the largest ever recorded loss in global crop production was only 4.6%. And that caused a lot of trouble with people not having access to essential grains like wheat and corn. And of course, the markets being really impacted and going all over the place. So now imagine that all salmon, shrimp, carp, tilapia farms, everything, imagine their losses being limited to between 0 and 5%. So I think if we achieve that, we'll be really well on our way to meet that challenge of feeding the world by 2050. And that's even before considering the establishment of new farms. So that is really where we sit at Knip that is our approach. To improve the productivity of aquaculture farms and with of course within the same impact and specifically We target stress-related losses, and especially during the nursery phase, where the animals are both fragile and handle a lot. So Knip Bio is a precision fermentation company, and we ferment a bacteria like this one in the picture that you see. It is a leaf symbiont, and that means it is found everywhere on anything green outside on all the leaves. And this is one of those things that we have all encountered without knowing it. And if any of you has eaten lettuce in a salad, you've also eaten that bacteria. So it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere in nature. We've all been in contact with it. This is our fermentation process, which is really quite straightforward. Our bacteria is a methylotroph, and so we use methanol as a feedstock. Liquid fermentation offers many advantages over gas to solid fermentation, and we use standard equipment to run that fermentation. And so together, that really greatly reduce our costs. Once the fermentation process is over, we harvest the bacteria, we pasteurize it, and we dry it. That's it. That's really it. There's no other processing to it. There's no extraction, adding anything to it or anything like that. So the product is a dried, inactivated wholesale product that can then be directly mixed and added with other dry ingredients in the feed formulations. It's very easy to add to feed. I want to point out that the methanol today that you can find in the market, the vast majority of it is produced from natural gas, so fossil energy. So currently, our process is carbon positive. However, fermentation technologies in general typically use only a fraction of the land and the water to produce a unit of say, protein compared to terrestrial crops. So we have a big advantage in terms of product there on land and water use. But I also want to add that today there are technologies to produce what is called green or even from biomass or even e-methanol. And this is really exciting because e-methanol is when you produce methanol from captured CO2 and hydrogen that you can produce from hydrolyzing the water using renewable energy. And so that gives really a really completely green process that would make our operation carbon neutral, if not carbon positive. Sorry, carbon negative, of course, carbon negative. And so this is not a pipe dream. We're actually already in conversations about such a facility based on e-methanol, and we are hoping to see this project come to fruition in the next few years. In terms of R&D and product development, we've been busy with over 50 animal trials to date and counting. And we've really spent the gamut there in terms of species from cold water to warm water species, freshwater and marine species, and of course, shrimp. The trials that we've conducted also span the whole thing from typical university research scale trials in control conditions, all the way up to on-farm demonstration trials. And so that trove of data really allowed us first to demonstrate the safety of the product and secure regulatory approval in the US. We have AFCO and FDA approval there in the US, as well as CFIA in Canada. We also have regulatory approval in other regions in the world, especially in Asia Pacific. And so we are currently selling on the market. All right, so that was a quick intro of Knip Bio. And so what is it really with Juve? So as I mentioned, we target stress-related factors and impacts, starting with the survival of the animals. And I want to start talking about shrimps. This trial here, this graph shows you three combined research scale trials where we had several feeds at different inclusion rates. And looking at the survival, we can see this upward trend, general trend around these inclusion rates. And these were your typical bread and butter growth trials. We did not try to challenge the animal. Survival was recorded, but not the primary focus of those trials. So we saw this data and saw, maybe there's something going on here. So we went back and actually conducted a controlled EMS challenge with, again, various inclusion rates of juve in a feed, which were fed to the shrimps, and then the shrimps were exposed to the Vibrio, and this shows survival rates compared to the negative control. And so we see at the 5% inclusion rate, really a dramatic improvement here, where survival went from 24% to 75%. And so such a jump here represents a likelihood of survival that is multiplied by 10. We have a 10x factor here. So this was really remarkable. And so this is really what caused the whole line of research there and product development. Fast forward a few years there, and we got into farms. This is trout, because of course the question is, how do these controlled trials scale up and transfer to the real world? And so we got into a trout farm and collaborated with them. And their process that they were interested in was a transfer from indoor nursery to an outdoor grow out, which and that transfer occurs at about 9 grams of fish size. And of course, that transfer is very stressful for the animal, and the farm sees typically increased mortalities in the aftermath of the transfer. And so we went in and fed the fish either a control commercial diet or a custom formulation with Juve in there for 46 weeks. This is our typical recommendation, 46 weeks prior to the transfer. And then the fish are monitored after the transfer. And we see here that the mortality, which was in a control, very typical for that site, we see an improvement in survival by about 40% of the survival odds. So the fish fed the Juve were about 40% as likely to survive as the fish in the control group. We repeated that trial 4 times. Of course, in the interest of time here, I will only present 2 more times because those times were really interesting and exciting. So in that second trial demonstration, we applied the same protocol, feed the fish ahead of the transfer, and then monitor the fish. And in this case, 4 days after the transfer, the fish got sick with bacterial cold water disease. And per the farm SOP, after the disease was diagnosed in both groups were switched to medicated feed for 10 days. And after 10 days, they were returned to their original experimental feeds. And so what you see in the graph here is these differences in survival odds improvements from the Juve compared to the control for each of those subperiods. So we see here between the transfer and the outbreak of the disease, those 4 days, we have a survival odds improvement of 1.3, 1.4, extremely similar to the first trial I just showed you. But then during the phase where the fish received the medicated feed, the difference in survival was really striking, with over 3.5 times the likelihood of survival in the fish fed the Juve. And even after the fish got back on, after those 10 days and the fish got back onto their experimental feed, there was still a remarkable difference. And after where they got back, everybody got back after the trial period onto the commercial feed, still the difference. So overall, the fish were twice as likely for the entire period. The fish were twice as likely to survive with the Jew feed as they were with the control feed. So that was really quite remarkable. In the third trial, so same thing. The fish were fed before the transfer and actually a little bit after as well for about 5 days. And in this case, talk about luck. They got hit by IHNV 2 weeks after 2 weeks after the transfer. And so it's a viral disease. So obviously, no medicated feed in this case, and so the fish were kept on the experimental feed all the whole time. But the difference couldn't be clearer here again. So the Jew feed being over 4 times as likely to survive after 38 days of monitoring after the transfer compared to the control fish. So that was really a striking difference. Um, and that's a lot of fish saved right there. So I've been talking a lot about odds of survival, likelihood of survival, and things like this. And I know it can be difficult to wrap our heads around these numbers. The reason why I use it is because survival rates simply don't scale, and they don't mean the same thing depending on the starting or the typical survival rate that a farmer will see for a given phase or event. If I tell you that the survival is increased by 20 points, it doesn't mean the same thing if I talk about a 30 or 70%. And of course, if we start at 90%, it's going to be impossible and nonsensical. So that's why I use these numbers, because they scale and they allow me to give you a better estimate of what kind of survival can be expected based on the initial survival that is typically observed at a given event. I've mentioned that we've done 4 of those demonstration trials. We repeated them 4 times. And so if I run the analysis over the 4 trials, 2.4x is the factor that I obtained with all the trials combined together. So what does this mean? Let's just use a table and take an example. If you have a process or a phase in the production cycle where there is typically 30% mortality, 70% survival, applying that factor, I can tell you that you should expect somewhere around 85% survival instead of the 70, so 15% point jump there from 72 to 85. So that's what these numbers mean. So during these trout trials, we also noticed that the feeding behavior was different between the control and the Jew group. And this was one of these secondary effects that we didn't expect. And that turned out to be quite as important, as almost more important in some ways than the survival effect. So we went and we actually scored the feeding behavior of the trout immediately after the transfer. And so this is what we see for the first trial I showed you. So we have the feeding score on the bottom here. A score of 4 means that the fish are feeding normally, aggressively. This is what we want to see. A 1 means that the fish aren't even touching the feed, completely uninterested, 0 feed intake. And the y-axis represents the number of days that the fish spend at each score for that month of monitoring time after the transfer. So here in the blue, the control fish, we see this typical very stressed fish, sluggish response at first, and they slowly recover and slowly build up their feeding response before finally returning to a normal aggressive behavior, during that period. And in contrast, the Jewfish really did not skip a beat. They went right back onto feed as if nothing had happened almost. And this was really highly repeatable. I showed you here the data corresponding to the other 2 trials that I showed you before. And you see that the same pattern occurs where the control fish slowly return to normal while the Jew-fed fish really maintain their appetite, go right back onto fish or onto feed or almost right back. And so there's really no lost feeding days. And so this is directly seen onto the performances, growth, and FCR of the fish. In the control for trial 3, where I remind you, this is the viral outbreak. So of course we have here sick fish. They don't eat, they don't grow, they don't convert. But in contrast, our fish and Juve, they do eat, they do grow, they do convert. And so there's no loss of feeding days again, and you maintain your normal behavior and your normal performances of the fish. So this is really interesting and really striking, really exciting. All right, so what does this mean for the farm? Really, we all know that, and I'm not the one saying it, that a strong fish in a nursery is a strong fish for the remainder of the production cycle. And shout out to our Witaya friends who we are hear from them tomorrow, I believe. And so we use their platform. And so I got this graph here representing the entire production period from zero to market size. And the red box represents the time window where we feed in the nursery, in the Jew feed in the nursery. And assuming, of course, that everything after that is normal and the same between the two groups. That effect in survival here and appetite maintenance during that period and after that stressor means that at the end of this of the whole production cycle, we can expect 17% more biomass of market-sized fish at the end of the production cycle. And this is really remarkable, and especially given that the investment that the farm would make here with the Jew feed represents only less than 1% of the total feed cost throughout the entire production cycle here to get to this market size fish. So it's really striking and super exciting. So in summary, then to wrap up, Juve is a really unique ingredient with unique stress resilience properties, which significantly reduces the losses associated with predictable stressors, such as the handling and the transfers of the fish. And we do that by decreasing the mortalities and increasing, as a result, increasing the productivity by 10% or more, as we saw in this case here. We see that the behavior, and especially the feeding behavior in those stressful periods, is maintained for fewer non-feeding days. We maintain normal growth in FCR, and together so that allows for more predictable and steadier and production. The confluence of these two benefits there means that there is a more efficient use of medicated feed. We saw this effect there clearly in that second trial, and then overall better general animal welfare, which also helps protecting the reputation of the farm. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me today. I'm looking forward to the questions, the Q&A. And here's my email also. Feel free to reach out if you want to connect later. I'll be super happy to talk more. Thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Guillaume. Let's get right into the questions. The first one I'm seeing here is, can you speculate the mechanism of action of the product?
Right. So, like I said earlier, our product is pasteurized, is inactivated, so the bacteria is dead, but it's whole. And so we really have a complex package of this whole cell. The bacteria naturally produces a host of bioactive compounds I'll just mention two of them. Number one is PHB, polyhydroxybutyrate, which is a polymer of butyrate and of known gut enhancer, if you weigh. The second one is that because that bacteria lives on the surface of leaves, it has to protect itself from the UV of the sun rays, and so it produces this pigment, this bacterial pigment. So the bacteria is actually naturally pink. Um, if actually the little secret there is the word Knip. Knip Bio is the word pink spelled backwards. That's how the company got its name, actually. And so that pigment is 30 carbon long. It's not 40 like astaxanthin and Canfa and all these pigments that we see oftentimes in aquaculture, and will not impart color to the fillet of the fish. So does not impart color. However, it's still a very powerful antioxidant, and so we have there, just like most pigments, they're really powerful antioxidants. So, but again, there's plenty others that we just don't have time to go over. But so those two together already, there's it's a multi-effect complex package that we have there.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Guillaume. Got another one here. It says, you mentioned mixing with other feed ingredients. Can
Mhm.
extrusion process negatively affect the functionality of the product?
So no, all the farm-based trials that I've shown here, the feeds were manufactured in a commercial feed manufacturers, and so the control feed was actually one of their formula. It's a closed formula. I don't know anything about it. And we include the Juve at the expense of another protein. Juve contains typically between 53, 54% crude protein that's highly digestible, 90% plus on an amino acid basis. And so we formulate it like a protein, even though we use it for its functional properties. And so that's exactly what they did during those farm trials. That basic closed formula was simply modified in a custom formula to produce the feed commercially in a commercial extruder. So no impact on the performances there.
Beautiful. Got another one here. It says, in that these are on-farm trials, how many control treatments were compared to how many JUV treatments?
Right. So this is why we repeated that trial 4 times. So it was, as oftentimes in farm situation, you're often limited in the replication that you can do at the same time. So each of those trials that I showed, there were one raceways for each treatment, but this is why we repeated it 4 times. And so there is, when you combine all these tanks together and you you treat them as replicates, and you run statistical analysis on them, this is where I get the 2.4x that I mentioned. And that difference is statistically significant. I don't know if the question was kind of hinting at the stats or not, but anyway, I'm happy to refine the answer if that didn't quite answer the question there.
No, that was
Just let me know.
perfect. Thank you. Got another one here. It says, what is the cost per ton impact on formula cost?
Cost per ton impact. So we know, well, okay, so we've done that exercise, and I'm again, I'm going to answer the question hoping that I answer it correctly and answer the actual question that was asked. But the mileage will vary, obviously, depending on the farm and the operation. But we've done one exercise with that participating farm, and we know that we reduced the production cost of the fish per kilograms of fish produced, right? And so I believe, yeah, sorry, I don't have that number on top of my head, but it would be specific to each farm, anyways. But those efficiencies of production mean that your overall uh, operating costs go down per kilogram or per ton of fish produced.
Perfect. Awesome. Got another one here. It says, does this product require a veterinary prescription?
No, we are not a nutraceutical or anything like that. We are a functional ingredient. Um, and so, no, it's not a nutraceutical or anything.
Gotcha. Okay. There's one in the chat here. I apologize if I pronounce any of these words wrong. But it says
That's okay.
any chance of lactococcus bacterial or any or other bacterial transfer in the feed. We have this issue in California.
Okay. So, our process, like I said, uses methanol as a feedstock. This has also the other advantage, beside all the ones that I mentioned in the presentation, the advantage of being, um, you know, bacteriostatic at the very least. And so the concentration of methanol that we have in the fermenter um, are really helpful to maintain the purity of that fermentation culture, right? Other bacterias are just killed by the methanol. And after that, our downstream process is extremely quick and simple. Like I said, it's pasteurized and then dried. And so usually we get a clean product. There are accidents, of course, and we control. This is part of our QC. We measure the contamination, we characterize it, and if it doesn't pass QC, it doesn't get to market. Yeah, after that, it's packaged. We can package either in 20-kilo bags, or we can do super sacks, yeah, after that it's whatever the customer wants.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, looks like we got time for one more here.
Sure.
So it says, are the benefits of JUV specific to a certain type of stressor or certain pathogens?
Right. So right now we've done the work with EMS in the shrimp, and we've done the work in trout, as you saw, and saw effects with bacterial cold water disease, and sorry, IHNV. So that's the data we have. We can't screen for every possible pathogens out there, but the fact that we see things happening in shrimp, in trout, in other species that I haven't mentioned, and having an effect on all these different pathogens. There may be a pathogen out there it has no effect, but so far that leads me to the data we have leads me to believe that we have a fairly broad range of action, and so it's not specific, clearly.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Guillaume. Unfortunately, that is
Yeah,
all the time we have for today. I
thank
just want
you.
to, yeah, of course. I just wanted to once again extend a thank you to Knip Bio for sponsoring this webinar today. Again, just wanted to thank Guillaume for his time and for his presentation today. It was very informative. Finally, just want to extend a big thank you to the audience for your questions and participation. Watch your inboxes for a link to the recording and any resources from today's session. Thanks, everybody. I hope you have a great and safe day.
Thanks very much, and yeah, I remain available if you want to send me an email, shoot, and we'll talk. That's great.
Awesome. It's great talking to you today, Guillaume.
All right.
Have a good one.
Thanks, Alex, and everybody. Bye.